Welcome to Hive Mind. This is Edge with my co-host Speaker. How's it going, Speaker?
Good. How you doing?
Doing all right. Today we're going to talk about and dive into a really interesting topic, the Georgia Guidestones. This discussion is going to touch on a lot, like the background, the symbolism, what it all means from our perspective and relative to the time that we're currently living in. So I want to preface this by saying that the Georgia Guidestones are riddled with symbolism that connects to everything from mathematical code and sacred geometry, cyclical cosmic events that cause global catastrophe, astronomy, ancient civilizations, esotericism. There's no way we can cover it all in detail. But we're going to touch on some key points. So, Speaker, I want to get into just the basics and the background, and then you can hand it back over to me and I'll deep dive into the background.
Yeah, this was something that really took us on a journey. I didn't think it would take us down this far down the rabbit hole, but it really did. Kind of surprised us a little bit.
It did.
It did. So let's get into the basics of what is the Guidestones. So the Georgia Guidestones were unveiled on March 22nd, 1980 in Urbit County, Georgia. But it was commissioned in 1979 when a gentleman named Robert C. Christian, which is a pseudonym, walked into the Urbiton Granite Finishing Company and said on a small group of loyal Americans he wanted to commission a structure. Now, the owner of the granite company, by the name of John Finley, thought he was a little bit crazy because of the scale and the scope of these Guidestones. So what he did, just to try to discourage him a little bit, he quoted him a price that was 7 times higher than any job they had ever taken before. And on the spot, Christian accepted the quote. And to put a note in, which I found very interesting, John Finley was a self-described Freemason, which I found a little bit interesting, even though with the Guidestones, I don't really see it much lining up with Freemason ideology. Anyway, from there,
I do, and I'm going to get into it.
Okay, get into it. From there, Christian went. He had to go to the bank, the local bank, to actually arrange this money to pay this company, and he met with a person called Wyatt Martin. Now, these two people were the only people to see or to meet Christian before this monument was erected. The interesting thing here is Martin had to get a real name of Christian, which Christian reluctantly gave him, but which I assume is under some sort of legal contractual agreement where he couldn't release it, because I doubt a person with this sort of secrecy and with the backing of this sort of group would just give it away freely. So with that, he got the money arranged, which was in excess of $100,000. Now this is back in the late 70s. That's a lot of money. So all that went ahead, and not just did they have to pay for the stone. Robert C. Christian actually bought 5 acres around where this monument was going to be placed. Now, the Georgia Guidestones are made up of 5 stone tablets, 1 in the center and 4 around the sides, with a capstone on top. Now, the capstone on top has a message that reads, "Let these be guidelines to an age of reason." Now, this is written in 4 ancient languages: Babylonian, Classical Greek, Sanskrit, and the one that I found most interesting was ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, which I kind of wonder why, and that there is theories going around that Finley actually orchestrated this whole thing to get more tourist attraction into Georgia. Now, I doubt that just because of the thought behind it.
There was a lot of thought that went into it.
There was a lot of thought about it, and I just don't think a person that owns a stone slab company could actually plan all of this out himself. So I disregard that theory personally. Now, on the other 4 stone tablets, there is what they call the guidelines, or the Ten Commandments. People have called it the Ten Commandments of the Illuminati. And they're quite interesting, and I'm conflicted about all of them, but they're written in 8 languages: English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, traditional Chinese, and Russian. Now, these guidelines read: 1. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. 2. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. 3. Unite humanity with a living new language. 4. Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. 6. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. 7. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. 8. Balance personal rights with social duties. 9. Prize truth, beauty, love, seeking humanity with the infinite. 10. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. And next to these tablets is an explanatory tablet. Now, this tablet is quite fascinating because this is where I believe most of the riddle is taking place and trying to find out. So it has on it the author's name, R.C. Christian, a pseudonym, sponsors a small group of Americans who seek the age of reason. Time capsule, placed 6 feet below this spot, on, to be opened on, but no date has been given or engraved. So it's quite an interesting thing, and it takes some really big turns. So I'm going to let Edge go down that rabbit hole with you.
There's a lot going on here. It's a riddle, and there's a lot of clues provided. So yeah, I want to deep dive into some of this. First of all, with R.C. Christian being this alias of the person who commissioned this piece, it's engraved on that footstone that's a few feet west of the actual structure. And it actually says R.C. Christian, and then in parentheses it says a pseudonym. Only a pseudonym is spelled miscorrectly. It's actually got an N on the end instead of an M. So it's hard to believe that this would be a misspelling unintentionally, considering all of the intent that went behind it and the planning and the calculations to engrave and erect this thing. I tend to think that this was intentionally misspelled and that it's a code. In fact, I believe there's a lot of codes throughout the Georgia Guidestone, and this is one of them. So I think it's an anagram, and the anagram, when you rearrange the letters, R.C. Christian, a pseudonym, it actually is an anagram for, quote, untarnished conspiracy, unquote. So keep that in mind when we're talking about this. But also, R.C. Christian is believed to be a reference to the legend of a man named Christian Rosencreuz. R.C. Rosencreuz, Christian. So that's where it comes from. And Christian Rosencreuz, he was the one who founded the Order of the Rose Cross. So the legend goes that Christian Rosencreuz learned esoteric wisdom among Arab sages, and he published 3 allegorical manifestos. Now, these manifestos were speaking to the universal reformation of mankind. And the opening of Rosencreuz's tomb is said to be a symbolic way of referring to this cycle of cosmic events. So the allegorical Rosicrucian manifestos are said to contain mathematical symbolism and sacred geometry throughout the whole manifestos. In other words, they're not just stories, they're actually mathematical code. Keep that also in mind in reference to the Georgia Guidestones. The The symbolism of using the name R.C. Christian, a pseudonym, also points to the universal reformation of mankind. And it also points to these cycle of cosmic events. Also, it points to sacred geometry and mathematical code. I think that was the purpose and the intent by using that name R.C. Christian. Okay, so the Georgia Guidestones are riddled also with mathematical code, from the size, the dimensions, the weight, the placement of the stones, to the geographical location, to the astronomical features on it, and even the words written on them. There's a mathematical code to all of it, and cracking that code is the key to understanding fully the symbolism of the Georgia Guidestones. Now, I'm not smart enough to have cracked that code, but I am smart enough to know that someone out there is smarter than me and has cracked it.
And don't underestimate yourself.
Well, maybe. But they went to great lengths to calculate precisely all of the dimensions, weight, location, everything, and inscribe this information on the footstone a few feet west of the Guidestones. So that time capsule buried beneath that footstone is also a symbolic reference to Rosencross's tomb, which refers to the cycle of cosmic events. And I believe that time capsule may actually contain manuscripts, ancient texts on sacred geometry, mathematical code, and this cycle of cosmic events that it's referring to. So what cycle of cosmic events are we talking about here? I think Stonehenge provides a clue, because the Georgia Guidestones are referred to as the American Stonehenge, because symbolically it's a representation of Stonehenge, but also the astronomical features that they both have. So Stonehenge and many other ancient structures and artifacts, including the Mayan calendar, Göbekli Tepe, the Great Pyramids, all of these tracked an astronomical cycle known as the Great Year, or the precession of the equinoxes. The ancients all tracked this precession of the equinoxes. Why? Why did they do this? Because they believed this long year cycle was paramount in the long-range planning of human civilization on Earth. Why did they believe this? Because the precession of the equinoxes tracks the cyclical cosmic events that cause global catastrophe at the end point and middle point of every cycle. So it's like a cyclical restart about every 12,000 years, basically. So what is the precession of the equinoxes exactly? Well, we all know of certain cycles that the Earth makes. Of course, one revolution on its axis, is a 24-hour cycle, represents one full day and night. One revolution around the sun represents one full year, 12 months. Okay. But this long, great year is about a 25,000-year cycle. And what it is a simple way of describing it is the cycle is, it marks the Earth's wobble as it spins on its axis, kind of like a top wobbles. So envision kind of a top spinning and that little wobble as it spins. Okay, that is what the precession of the equinoxes tracks. And this cycle lasts approximately 25,920 years, shifting 1 degree every 72 years, with each age within that cycle lasting approximately 2,160 years. We're currently in the age of Pisces, and we've been in it for about 2,000 years. And we're actually on the cusp between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, which is the halfway point in the precession of the equinoxes cycle. Okay? Are you following me?
I'm following you, sort of. No, but the Mayans also figured out the precession of the equinox.
Oh, yes, they did. All the ancients tracked this closely. It was hugely important to them. They understood that the long year cycle, the precession of the equinoxes cycle, was paramount to humanity. All right. This pattern of global catastrophes is echoed by many ancient civilizations and many ancient stories. You could look at Sumerian, Mayan, Incan, Hopi, Greek, Babylonian. I mean, the list goes on. And whether they're allegorical or historical, they all speak to this cosmic cycle that is linked to the cyclical reset about every 12,000 years. Okay? This is part of what I believe the esoteric knowledge that secret societies have been hiding from humanity for hundreds and hundreds of years. I don't want to be labeled as like a doomsdayer, but I do believe the word of the Bible, and I believe it's the truth, and including the prophecy of the events that are to come, that are prophesied in Revelations. And I'm not going to put a time on it, but I do believe that we are in that window of time, and that window of time could be large. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of years. You know, I tend to believe it's sooner than that, actually. And I actually think that this group who erected these Georgia Guidestones, they thought so too. But what I did want to mention about R.C. Christian and the Order of the Rose Cross, they are closely connected to the origins of the Freemasons. Okay? That's the Freemason connection. I believe that these secret societies, this is a lot of what has to do with the hidden information that they have kept from humanity. This cyclical global event that happens approximately every 12,000 years and confirms what the Bible has said and has prophesied of the events to come, which we may be in that window of, in that halfway point in the precession of the equinoxes, that cusp of the transition of Pisces, the age of Pisces, into the transition of into the age of Aquarius, some sort of global event as prophesied in the book of Revelations. I don't think it's impending doom right this minute, but I do think we may be in the window of time, whether it's a year, 10 years, 100 years, 2, 3, 4, 500 years, who knows? But
and these guidestones were, as described by Christian, meant to last a global catastrophe. I mean, he said that exactly
precisely.
in his thing. I agree with you on the esoteric side of things because of the dig on it, but a way a lot of people kind of brushed this over is that during that time when the Guidestones were erected was during the Cold War. And a lot of people thought there was going to be a nuclear war, nuclear damage, and that is how a lot of locals described why it's written that way, or why it was erected, in case after that nuclear event, people will receive these Guidestones and work towards it. Now, I don't believe that. I actually believe there's a lot more to it, like you've just explained, because we've dug into it. But that is how a lot of this stuff, including the inscriptions on the Guidestones, are brushed off.
Right. And one reason why people believe that, and maybe this is a good time to mention it, is that R.C. Christian, whoever was holding that alias, so wrote a book several years after the erection of the Georgia Guidestones, and the book was about the Georgia Guidestones and his beliefs, and he did speak a lot on the Cold War, the potential for global catastrophes by man, made by man. And I know before we started recording, we were talking about this book a lot, and I was just giving you my thoughts on it, just about how this guy, R.C. Christian, we'll call him, we know that's not his actual name, but he seems to think he's coming from a sense of benevolence towards humanity, that he is trying to do humanity a solid with all of this information. But it's perverse because his plans, and I guess the people who he represents, their plans, it just goes into more depth about what those 10 guidelines are written on the Guidestones.
Yeah, I think that book was the one, because look, I was a bit on the fence by a lot of these inscriptions because we know they hide things in plain sight. We know they use words to confuse and distract. For example, Planned Parenthood doesn't sound like a bad thing. If you don't, like, who doesn't want to plan, their parenthood or their family? Um, BLM, Black Lives Matter. Of course they do. You agree with that statement. All lives matter. But the ideology behind it is a lot more sinister. Antifa, another play on the word game. So we know they like to hide things within common speech. But I think this book kind of unraveled it a little bit for him just because of some of the words he uses to describe population control and yeah, these sort of things. He was definitely very concerned about eugenics, pretty much. And that we all know eugenics is a big part of the cabal's plan or Illuminati plan, whatever you want to call them. And for those that don't know what eugenics is, it's described as a set of beliefs and practices that aim to improve the genetic quality of a human population, historically by excluding people and groups judged to be inferior and promoting those judged to be superior. So examples of this, Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood. The most well-known case of this is, of course, Nazi Germany, Hitler, um, trying to make his perfect race by culling all other races that he believed to be inferior. But yeah, Christian really kind of dropped his mask in this book a little bit too much, I think.
Right, I agree with you there. You really get to kind of enter his mind and where he's coming from this book. So should we get into the 10 guidelines that are listed on the Georgia Guidestones and kind of give our thoughts on what they mean and how they're relevant to today?
Yeah, let's dive into it. Like I said, a lot of them I'm still trying to work out. Like I'm still trying to work out what the play is there because some of them don't sound that bad. But like I said before, that's how they do it. And also at the end of this, please comment what you think they mean because like we don't have all the answers here. We're just coming from our own personal point of view. So we would love to also hear from you and your thoughts on them. So let's start with the one that is the most nefarious and that I think the one that most people get their back on is number one, maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature.
Right. So what are we sitting at globally right now for our population?
It's a lot of billions.
Right.
Right.
So
8 billion?
right. So talking about, and I think pretty clear language here about depopulation. But as we've kind of mentioned, the whole backstory of the Georgia Guidestones, it was made with the assumption, the prediction that there is an impending global event that would be like a global restart of humanity. And so these guidestones were intended for the survivors. Now, I guess from the person's perspective who erected these guidestones, I guess they're assuming that the global catastrophe would have wiped out a lot of humanity. But even still, the concept of maintaining humanity at a specific number does insinuate all of the evil things that go along with that, with depopulation and population control, does it not?
100%. Like that was my thought on it. So like even if there was a catastrophe and say majority of the world was wiped out and the population was growing again, to sustain or maintain this, well, let's just call it a commandment for the sake of it, bad things would have to happen. Because as soon as it goes under this number, to keep that in perpetual balance with nature, that means in the crudest terms, you would have to cull human beings.
Right.
So either way, that is a monstrous thing.
Right. Yeah, it comes from this sense of, look, we're looking out for humanity, but really in its
All
application,
of them do. All of them do. That's what's confusing about it.
right? But in its application, the application of it is evil because of the deeds that would have to be done in order to allow that to happen, to keep the population at a certain level.
You can't do that naturally. Nature doesn't work like that. And who are they to perpetually determine what the balance of nature is?
Right.
That to me is a little bit egotistical.
But so let's apply it to today. Do we see evidence of the cabal influencing and trying to depopulate and or control the population?
A lot up this in this year. Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, I mean, and you could look at the UN's 2030 agenda. You could look at the 2021 agenda. You could look at, they've been trying population control and depopulation since the origin of the UN. In fact, I think that that was a lot to do with the creation of the UN, was the global population and their concern over being overpopulated and wasting natural resources or deplenishing natural resources. So there is a lot of evidence to see that this agenda of global depopulation, population control, I mean, they've been doing eugenics since the origin of Planned Parenthood. Since the turn of the 20th century, the concept of eugenics came out with Darwin's cousin, and you know, they've been implementing it ever since through the abortion agenda and vaccinations, you could even say, and so forth. So,
You could even put COVID on there if you think it is a man-made
and even
virus.
currently with the use of CRISPR technology, gene editing, with artificial intelligence, you could get into all of that, and advancements made in that to try to make the next step with the intention of trying to make the next jump or leap and quote unquote human evolution. So there's a lot encoded into just one line on the Georgia Guidestones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move on to two.
So number 2, guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. So once again, that kind of parallels the first one with having this perfect race.
Right. It seemed that like Christian was obsessed with the perfect scenario, achieving perfection in this world, which we know really isn't. It's, you know, it's fantasy. But it is what they are trying to achieve, is perfection on the human scale and on the Earth's scale. The technology and gene editing, with the technology and artificial intelligence and so forth. We can also talk about, because he's talking about reproduction here in number 2, obviously. I think he even talked about in his book, justifying abortion for depopulation purposes, right?
And that it should be a government policy.
Right.
He also mentioned it that way. But what's also sinister about this, like just looking at it now, guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. So does that mean if a child was born with, say, some sort of disease that's not life-threatening but does impair the child, they can still have a full life? I mean, a lot of people are born with either, you know, certain diseases or certain problems, deformities a certain way. That doesn't mean they're any less intelligent. You know, some of them live full lives and some of them actually go ahead and do great things. Does that mean those babies would have to be culled at birth?
Exactly. This number 2 guideline of guiding reproduction
I,
wisely and
I, hate,
valuing.
I hate using the word cull, but it's the best way I can describe this.
Right.
But continue,
It
sorry.
it justifies killing babies that are not genetically perfect, and it also justifies genetically modifying babies, designer babies, to achieve human perfection. Does it not?
Mm,
And we
it
have
does.
and we have the technology even today to be able to do that. It's
Mm,
really the only thing that's preventing us from doing that is ethics. And there have been people who have gone outside of that and actually done it. We know that there have been two genetically altered babies brought to full term just a couple of years ago. A Chinese scientist did it, much to the outrage of the scientific community.
mm. Okay, so number 3, unite humanity language. Now, I think this one's like most people listening now know that I'm not a Christian, but I do believe a lot of that stuff too. I know that's a bit weird, but I don't disregard anything. But I think there is significant religious meaning in this one. I don't know if you picked it up,
Oh,
but
definitely did. This is
oh, you
referring to the
did.
Tower of Babel. Uh,
100% read my mind.
yes. So the Tower of Babel, as it's spoken of in the Bible, was the Babylonians had achieved were speaking a universal language and trying to achieve a heavenly sort of status by building the Tower of Babel. And God was not going to allow that because they were circumventing God's plan. They were doing it their way instead of God's way. And so he dispersed all of the people and made them speak different languages. So what was this one universal language? Well, my theory was that the people back then were actually highly advanced, and it could have been some form of telepathy even. That's just a theory of mine. But
I
if you
like it.
but if you can fast forward to current times, the advances that we're making in artificial intelligence, can you imagine there being some time in the very near future where we were all connected to one artificial intelligence, and through that artificial intelligence we were able to communicate without using words, sort of like a hive mind, not to throw our name under the bus.
We do it every week. It's just we have to continue doing it now. We do it every week. But no, well, it does say living new language.
Right. And that would be what I'm referring to. A living new language, where it can constantly change. Meaning, like a living new language could mean where it grows, evolves, and continues to have relevance regardless of wherever you live, whatever the time is. It's just a constantly of growing and evolving and staying alive language. So, but how would you have a universal language? Well, that's my theory, that it's either some form of telepathy, but really, what I really think is that they're referring to some sort of artificial intelligence that connects us all, where we're able to communicate through our minds.
That's a good one. I like that theory. So number 4, rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. So this is where it starts getting a little bit harder to decipher.
What do you think?
It all seems pretty logical,
Right. It
but
seems logical and reasonable, doesn't it?
it seems logical and reasonable, but I don't like the word rule. And I think that is something to do with decoding this. Rule, passion, faith, and tradition.
Here's the sinister part of it. What it's really saying, in my opinion, is disregard your humanity, disregard thinking and using your heart, disregard your faith in God and your traditions. Okay, these are the things that that we should never disregard, in my opinion. And rule things with reason, with tempered reason. It's all logic. It's no spirituality. Okay, it's taking spirituality out of it, out of the equation. And that is the problem I have with this, is that they want you simply to be thinking with your minds, never using your spiritual intuition and your connection with God. That's the problem.
It's a good one. So 5, protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. I'm a little bit stumped on this one.
Yeah, I can't see anything wrong with that. But what 5 does is it connects to 6, and 6 is the problem.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So if you took the numbers away, so if you took 5 and 6 away and said protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts, let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court.
Right.
Say you put that as 1.
Right. So the world court, that's the problem. So,
that is the problem.
Yes, they want to basically break down all national sovereignty and have one world government that is controlling all of the people. And so that's the problem with it.
That's pretty much just describing the New World Order and the UN that we have today.
Exactly. Everything that they're trying to lead to with regards to their policies on immigration, with regards to their policies on everybody has to kind of answer to the UN. And, even with, you could say, and people have theorized, for example, with these riots that have taken place, worldwide, but, a lot going on here in the US, people were speculating that it would get to a point where the UN would try to come in and save the day. And so you can see things like that, where there are these events that are intentionally designed as a power grab for the UN to try to gain more power and control over the nations, right?
Yep. It's a good one. 7, avoid petty laws and useless officials. Now, I agree with this statement.
Right, I do too, but I think 7 also kind of melts into 5 and 6, meaning, we're going to break down your national sovereignty. You don't need cities to govern. You don't need states to govern. You don't need nations to govern. You really just need one world government. So we're going to eliminate all of your independence on a city level, state level, and national level, basically.
That's actually good. I managed to put 5 and 6 together, but I didn't put 5, 6, and 7 together. And when you put those 3 together, it actually does make a lot more sense.
Right.
Because, like we said, this is a puzzle. This is completely riddled with stuff that we're not going to be able to touch on here. But let's go to 8. Balance personal rights with social duties.
Sounds pretty socialist to me, doesn't it?
That's exactly what I was thinking. It sounds a little bit socialist to me. So what is personal rights? It's not described enough, and how much social duties that you have to take. I mean, there's a lot of social duties going on at the moment with marches.
Exactly.
Protests and
tearing down statues.
Be part of the social.
Right. And you want to talk about taking away your personal rights for social duties? Talk about this pandemic. I mean, we've been forced under quarantine. We've been forced to wear masks. We've been forced to stay home, to close our businesses. And this has everything to do with taking away our personal rights and sacrificing them for these quote unquote social duties, which I think are all by design.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Okay, now this one I was having a bit of trouble with too. 9, prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite. Now the problem I have with this is, what is the infinite?
Right. Yeah, I don't see a whole lot wrong with this statement other than the infinite. It
Mm,
is a really nebulous description of what I think they're referring to as God without referring to God.
mm.
No?
Well, this tablet seems very anti-God, so I think we can eliminate that being a reference to God. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Their version of whatever the
Infinite is.
antithesis of God is, which I have my beliefs on what that is.
And I mean, you can even obscure beauty and love. I mean, people have beauty and love for dark things.
True.
It's yeah, it's all very ambiguous. So let's go to the last one, which I know you found very interesting.
I did.
Yeah, so I'll let you go into it. Number 10, be not a cancer on the earth, leave room for nature, leave room for nature.
Right. Okay. So, on its face, that doesn't seem bad. But again, it goes back to the depopulation agenda, meaning, there's no way that you can overpopulate. You need to control your population so that nature has room to grow. Okay. So, that's on its face the problem. But what's interesting about number 10 is the repetition there, because none of the other guidelines are repeated. It's not like a poem where it rhymes. There's really no reason to repeat it. Doesn't that seem out of place to you?
And it's not like the last part was yelled or anything. It's not
Right.
it's just re- repeated.
Right. So that's odd to me. And just like R.C. Christian, a pseudonym, misspelled intentionally, was a code, an anagram, I think this is too. I think it could either be that these words, just as I had described the dimensions, the location, the weight, the astronomical features on it, everything is a mathematical code. These words could even be a code, and it was probably necessary to repeat that last part of the statement in order to maintain the integrity of whatever that code is. Or that second part of the statement, the leave room for nature, the second one, is the code. I'm undecided on it. I tried to find an anagram that matched it. It's not perfect. I don't even know if I want to share it because I'm like, I'm kind of undecided about it. But I do think this is code. What do you think?
I think it has to be. I mean, we do know there's from what we've assessed and seen and analyzed that there does seem to be code in it. I think there's code in it for the date of the opening of the time capsule. We just haven't found it because there's no reason to leave that blank. So I believe that is on the tablet somewhere in something.
Exactly. And whoever can crack this numerical code that I know is these Georgia Guidestones are riddled with is going to understand so much more of what this all means. But I did try to find an anagram for leave room for nature. And I found one. So tell me what you think. If you switch the letters leave room for nature up, they could say, quote, rule fear over man too, unquote.
I like it.
Interesting.
That actually gave me a little bit of shivers, not gonna lie.
Oh, this thing is crazy. I mean, we could spend hours trying to decode this thing, but I think we can kind of all agree that the the ideals that the people behind these Georgia Guidestones have do not represent the majority of us. They represent the elites that plan to rule over us, right?
Definitely, 100% right. I don't think. this guy, even though it does preface a lot of about nature, and I don't think he was just some hippie out of the sticks that was concerned about climate control and trees.
Right.
Right? There's too much going on here, and that's why I don't believe that John Finley did it to just get attention to Georgia and make a bit of a tourist spot, because um, R.C. Christian also said that he didn't want any tourist stalls next to these monuments.
Right. No, I don't think that it was intentionally designed for tourism. I
Definitely not.
do think it's designed for for exactly what he's saying it's for. It's for humans who have survived an apocalyptic event that R.C. Christian was predicting, and that we can definitely look at ancient civilizations predicted, and even the Bible predicts will occur at some time on a cyclical cycle. And that these guidelines were intended for humanity afterwards. But the intentions behind these guidelines, we've been warned about them in the book of Revelations, that this is the new world order. This is the one world government, the one world religion that ushers in the Antichrist. And it does not have, even though it may seem just on its face, reading those 10 guidelines, it really does not have the best intentions for humanity.
I definitely don't see it that way. But I can understand how people reason with it, because there is a lot of people that love these guidestones. Not everybody hates them. I think the people that hate them are the people that have dove into the topic and like what we've just done, and kind of talk about it and try to see and try to rearrange their words here, because that's what they do.
Right. And a lot of people do hate it, and have definitely made reference to it as the New World Order's 10 Commandments, which is a mockery of the 10 Commandments of the Bible, and have defaced it even.
In 2008 and 2014, there was vandalism on it.
Right.
With a lot of down with the New World Order. Now, I'm totally against vandalizing these things, as much as I don't like them and I believe they are something sinister. I am a firm believer of not destroying any part of history.
Right. Well, there's something to be learned here. So, and I don't want to be hypocritical by saying, BLM and Antifa can deface the statues that I believe in and maintaining and preserving, while defacing the ones I don't believe in. To me, I just look at it as information and history, even though I know its origins and its intentions are evil.
100%.
All right.
100%. But I don't think it should be smashed or destroyed or defaced.
I hear you. All right. Well, are we ready to wrap up, or is there anything else we haven't covered? Gosh, there's so much to cover. We probably missed a ton.
We probably have.
There's so much.
That's just a bit of a taste. And please, for anyone, comment underneath if you have a different explanation to what we've just explained. Share it with us. There's no real wrong answers here. So.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us here on Hive Mind with Speaker and Edge. Please be sure to share, like, subscribe, and hit that bell. We'll see you back next time, right here on Hive Mind.